Order. Very good morning to everybody, and thank you for coming to this session of the Domestic Supply Chain Inquiry by the Energy Security Net Zero Select Committee. We have this morning Andrew Bowie, Minister, and Ben Golding from the Department of Energy Security and Net Zero. I think we shall crack on with the first question. So, Minister, we've had a lot of evidence that's been coming in from people about the lack of necessary capacity and capabilities within supply chains. What are the government plans to do this? And actually, specifically on this, there are a couple of sort of interesting points, which are that potentially we're looking at 15 gigawatts of supply coming through every year for the next 10 years. A report was written, I can't remember who wrote it, but we will have 7.8 gigawatts of shortfall by the end of 2028. And there's a huge problem with getting access to the grid. So there's a conundrum. How are you going to fix it?
Yeah, well, we're fully aware of the challenges, and we do have challenges. And firstly, can I say thank you very much for the invitation to appear before you again on what is a really important topic, actually. And I'm very pleased that the committee are taking an interest in this. As I said, the department fully aware of the challenges. We are in a globally competitive race for a finite resource. And we do not have, as we sit here right now, the manufacturing or supply chain capability within the United Kingdom necessary to enable us to reach our targets, which is why the government are determined that as we move forward with our ambitious targets for developing fixed bottom offshore wind, floating offshore wind, solar, new nuclear, and the other technologies that we're investing in, that we at the same time build up that manufacturing base so that we can have a supply chain within the UK without being beholden on foreign suppliers, as I said, which is we are all scrabbling for the same finite resource across the world as every country seeks to decarbonise and become more energy secure and independent.
We've got some questions more specifically on the supply chain, but what I'm particularly interested in is, does DESNZ have an analysis of the UK's supply chain vulnerabilities? So are you kind of on top of the details of where these problems are?
Absolutely.
And is that informing your policy?
100%, which is why we've announced the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, which is why we will be announcing, more detail will be forthcoming, on the Sustainable Industry Rewards Scheme, which will be launched alongside Auction Round 7. It's why we're engaging with industry. For example, our small modular reactor down selection programme, a key factor in terms of the decision to award to that vendor will be their commitment to building up a UK-based supply chain and manufacturing base to deliver that next generation of nuclear capacity. So in every aspect. And what we want to see through the increase, for example, in offshore wind. Now, we're really proud of what we've done so far, the first to fifth largest offshore wind farms in the world. But I think everybody would acknowledge that we don't have the jobs onshore to reflect the huge build that's been going on offshore. And we are still reliant on foreign manufacturing and supply chains to enable us to build. And we want to move away from that so that we can look back on this next phase of development in the North Sea with a tangible impact onshore and less of a reliance on foreign imports.
There is a problem with the grid, isn't there?
Yes.
So ultimately, and I gather there's a huge amount of potential capacity that would come in if they could get access to the grid, and there are these problems with access to the grid. And that seems to be something which is causing a huge amount of problems.
Yeah, so on the grid, Chair, we commissioned last year Nick Windsor to conduct a review into connectivity, and at the same time the ESO and Ofgem examining exactly what they need to do to bring the grid up to speed. It's frankly a disgrace that there are companies, organisations, individuals who are having to wait sometimes up to 14 years to get connected to the national grid. That's not sustainable, it's bad for investment, and it's holding this country back. So Nick Windsor commissioned his report, 10-point recommendations. The government accepted and is adopting all 10 points. We are engaging on one of the biggest improvements to the national grid in history. We are expecting to see a fourfold increase in demand on electricity over the next 10 years alone, and we need to build the infrastructure here in the UK to deliver that. So our Great Grid Upgrade Scheme, the response to Nick Windsor and the build that's going on across the UK is intended to deliver that capacity that we need so that we do not have that strain that we have at the minute and those ridiculous waiting periods that companies are having to wait for just now.
Are you confident? I should have known who authored this report, but it came up with a thing with a New Statesman yesterday. But there is a suggestion in this report by the end of 2028 we'll be seeing, as I say, this lack of capacity suggests brownouts and blackouts. Are you confident that we won't get brownouts and blackouts?
Yes, we are all aware of the looming capacity gap. That's why we're taking the decision we're taking right now to ensure that it does not happen.
Fantastic. Barry, did you want to come in?
I'm very grateful, Chair. Look, when we're looking at the supply chain and the problems, there's a real issue about transmission infrastructure, and we know that, and we know the difficulties in tackling that. But actually what industry have told us in their submissions is that the top two are not transmission infrastructure. It's about no visibility of the project pipeline, and it's about inconsistent policies. And those are things that very much are in your gift. We have to accept that there are certain things that are not in your power, but there are things that are. And those are the things that industry are telling us are creating real problems for them to get the investment that they need in.
Yeah, look, we hear the same concerns, industry raise it with us, but when it comes to the project pipeline, I mean, that's one of the reasons that we have instigated annual auction rounds. So from this year, there will be an auction round every year to give more certainty and visibility of what projects are coming downstream. We've created task forces with the solar industry, offshore wind industry, Carbon Capture and Storage Association, Hydrogen Delivery Council, and the nuclear bodies to ensure that there is this holistic view of what projects are coming downstream, so the industry does have the confidence that there will be opportunities to bid in for and develop a manufacturing base to support all of these projects.
Well, they've actually said a project-by-project approach is not a pipeline, and supply chain investments can take more than a project to pay back. So they need something. They are telling us they need something that is more comprehensive and more long-term.
Look, I mean, we are very much open to taking any action recommended or asked for by industry to ensure that we build up this manufacturing. We are aware of the huge challenges facing this country and of the concerns being raised by industry and others, and we will take whatever action necessary to ensure that we do not end up in a situation that we have done over the past 10 years with huge success in building, for example, as I said, the first to fifth largest offshore wind farms with no tangible, visible onshore legacy for that. So we are Barry, just to say, we are listening and we will act in response.
I think we're very pleased about the CFD allocation round and making that annualised. That's one element. What about their complaint about inconsistent policies and the way in which there's a disjunct between some of the things that are said and indeed some of the things that are in place? And you know what I'm thinking of here. The lack of clarity that industry feels, or the hesitancy they feel to invest because they're getting mixed signals from government.
I mean, I hear that and I understand their concerns, but I would dispute their interpretation of there being an inconsistent messages, or there being inconsistent messages from government, or a lack of clarity on what our position is.
Let me just give you what is perhaps the most obvious example, and that is the pushing back of the new electric cars and vans to 2035, and yet keeping in place the fact that 80% of those that are built by 2030 have to be electric. Now, so they're saying on the one hand, the message that the government's giving to the public is, don't worry about this, you've got another 5 years to bother about it. But the message that they're giving to industry is, no, you've still got to be up there with 80% by 2030. That gives them real problems. Because they think, if we're having to produce 80% of our stuff that is electric, and yet we don't have the demand from the public for it because they've sort of sat back and said, I've got more time to do this, then that creates a problem for them, not just in terms of their cash flow potentially, but actually in terms of their willingness to invest.
Yeah, look, I understand and I hear these criticisms all the time, but the Prime Minister was very clear when he made that decision that whilst we are resolutely committed to our net zero target of 2050 and decarbonising the grid, for example, by 2035, we have to take pragmatic and proportionate steps, and we cannot do it at the cost of impoverishing or making people poorer in the process. However, getting the industry into a place where it's ready to respond to what we expect there to be an upsurge in demand for, specifically electric vehicles, by 2035, with that 5-year gap, is something that we think is eminently sensible and does send a signal that the industry should be ready for the 2035 mandate to kick in, which, by the way, does bring us in line with most other EU countries on this.
I'm just passing on what industry is
I understand.
Thanks very much, Chair.
Lord Russell-Moore.
Very much. One might argue why you don't put a requirement on fleet vehicle purchase, because that would be the thing that would drive down the second-hand market as well, which is really key for people to buy in. But we've been told that the US Inflation Reduction Act and the EU Net Zero Industry Act is driving investment away from the UK. How does the government plan on responding to measures set out in these acts?
Well, look, we have brought forward the Green Industries Growth Accelerator, £900 million, which will give targeted support to investment coming into the United Kingdom. We will be giving more information on the Sustainable Industry Rewards Scheme, which will be launched in line with AR7, which will encourage and incentivise investment in mainly deprived areas in the United Kingdom, building up our green manufacturing base. We are still up there within the third or fourth best countries in which to invest in green and clean technology in the world. I'm very proud of that fact. And whilst we welcome what the United States of America and indeed the EU response is doing in terms of driving those countries towards their own net zero targets, which from a global perspective is obviously something that we want to see, we still think that we offer, through our contracts for difference, world-leading, recognised and championed by industry, through what we've achieved in the North Sea and indeed in other technologies, that the United Kingdom is still one of the most investable places in the world in which people can come and invest, knowing with the certainty, the open markets that we have here and the processes that have been long established put us in a prime position. We're not going to go toe-to-toe in a subsidy war with the United States of America, however.
I mean, the USA and the EU's measures really encourage inward investment within their country, and so it means, of course, the cash is less available to then come to us. But are you not worried that we have relied for too long on external investment and we've not been investing internally enough? If you look at the offshore wind sector, in terms of public entities, including public pensions, the UK only owns 0.03%, whereas the government of Malaysia owns 0.1% of our offshore wind capability. The government of Denmark owns 20.4% of our offshore wind capability. Norway, 9.2%. The city of Munich owns 0.8%, more than the UK government has invested in terms of ownership and assets of offshore wind itself. Is there not a danger? I know you talk about security of energy supply. Is there not a danger that we have relied too much on external investment and have not built up an inward investment market where people want to invest and the government is willing to match that investment?
Look, I would love to see more UK-based entities investing in our clean green future. And indeed, yesterday morning I had a roundtable with the Chancellor of the Exchequer and pension funds, encouraging them to do UK-based pension funds, encouraging them to do just that. But I also think it's a mark of pride, frankly, that the United Kingdom is such an attractive destination for inward investors from outside the United Kingdom to come invest their money, because it shows the confidence that the rest of the world has in our ability to deliver this, the confidence that they have in the stability of the United Kingdom as a place in which to invest, and the openness of the United Kingdom to inward investment. It's something that we should be very proud of, and I'm certainly not going to try and in any way act to put off anybody from wanting to invest in the United Kingdom. In fact, we should be, as I said, very proud of the fact that they are wanting to invest here.
Flash sales are always very popular for vultures. I'm not sure it necessarily means that it is. If our pension funds aren't investing, it raises a moment of concern in my mind that home investment is not as buoyant as inward investment. What do the home market know? And why are they not investing? But the other thing that
the idea that they're not investing just isn't the case.
Well,
but
not in the numbers.
Look, I want to see more UK-based investors in this technology. Of course, I do. But I also don't want to do anything that would put off inward investment from outside the United Kingdom. As I said, it's a point of pride that we are seen as such an investable destination by countries across the world.
Yes.
And by the way, as an old-fashioned open free marketeer, I think it's right and proper that we should be welcoming investment.
In terms of procurement of long-term contracts like cables, we've heard how Germany, for example, has bundled all the contracts together, made sure they've made long-term procurements to ensure that those supply lines are secured, and then companies can invest in building the factories that need the scale in Germany. Why have we not been doing the same? And if you say we have, can you give examples of where we have been doing that for supply line goods?
Yes,
where
I
we're
can.
bundling projects?
Yes, I can.
Good.
Just this morning, it was reported in the Financial Times, and a company that I have
Not
been
read my
engaged
issue
with, and a
today.
company that I've been engaged with for some time, Sumitomo, a Japanese company, will be opening a manufacturing plant in the Highlands to develop HVDC cables to support operations in the North Sea. That's building up our domestic supply chain, creating jobs in the United Kingdom to deliver cables for UK-based projects.
So will that secure enough cable capability for the next 10 years?
Well, obviously, it's a commercial decision between the operators, the developers, and the companies that are developing these factories.
The government has a role in bringing those commercial decisions together,
Yeah.
having a long-term plan, so that then they say that we need to ensure that the full capacity is onshored. Are we just relying on the goodwill of clever investors, or are we coordinating that and marshalling it, still commercial decisions, so that we make sure that our capability is being secured?
Well, there of course is a government role, and in terms of
What have you done
bringing manufacturing, well, in terms of the company that I just referenced, there has been ongoing discussions between my department, the Department for Business and Trade, the Scottish Government and others to ensure that we start to build up this capacity. And in terms of, as I said, the Sustainable Industry Rewards, which I can't go into too much detail right now, but in the next few weeks more detail will be forthcoming, they will be awarding support and assistance to those companies who are bidding through the auction round processes to build up the manufacturing base right here. So of course government has a role, but it is a commercial decision of those companies, and the developers, and indeed those operating the factories, as to how they go about their business and how they secure contracts. I do not believe the government has a role in that, no. But we should have a role in terms of...
You don't believe that the government has a role in coordinating those contracts so that there's long-term security of supply in the UK?
What we have a role in is attracting the investment, building up that manufacturing base, making the UK the best place in the world in which to invest and develop a business, and then making it a very attractive option for those companies to buy the cables that are being developed here in the United Kingdom, and other I say cables and other parts of the energy infrastructure.
Goods and services.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So, does the government have an aim that we will? Does the government have an aim in terms of percentages of what is secured domestically on goods and services?
I don't think we've got.
I don't think we'll have a percentage estimate. No.
So if you don't set a target, even if it's a target that it's an ambition that you're saying to people that are bidding for CFDs and others to say, look, this is the ambition we would like to meet, we're not going to bind you to it. How do you expect to be able to encourage companies to look at those options?
By making the UK the best place in which to invest and grow a manufacturing base in the world. That's my aim, that's my ambition, that's what we're doing.
So you've got you've got no measurable target to achieve that. So what other steps are you doing to marshal companies to onshore here?
Well, just to expand. So what we do have is measurable targets for generation capacity deployment, but to try and draw it together a bit more, we're looking at various things to set more of a long-term context. So, for instance, the commitment to a strategic spatial energy plan is trying to work with the energy system operator to set out that sort of long-term trajectory of what we need where across the UK to give certainty to industry and that confidence to invest, including in the supply chain.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Minister. So, in terms of offshore wind now, assessment report 6 and 7, AR 6 and 7, are the last opportunity to award contracts for 21 gigawatt, which I understand is what's needed, of offshore wind to be operational by 2030. Is that still achievable?
Yes, 100% achievable.
Great, good. So we've been told that the CFD Sustainable Industry Reward will have little effect on growing the domestic supply chain, the supply chains. Why does the Sustainable Industry Reward not include considerations on UK content, and why does it only apply to the offshore wind sector?
Well, it does. They will be incentivised these companies will be incentivised through sustainable industry rewards to invest in deprived areas within the United Kingdom. That's the entire point of having the sustainable industry rewards scheme. And the reason we're focused on offshore wind is because that is the area we're going to see most growth in over the next few years. And where I think we all agree we need to do much more to build up that tangible legacy of the huge builds that are going off in the North Sea, projected to be in the Celtic Sea, and indeed other waters of the UK.
Great, thanks. So I'm as you know, West Cornwall MP. We got very engaged in floating offshore wind. Had some disappointment in terms of what we had done locally to try and support development there. You've got early, as Vicky said, you've got early awards, CFD things secured. It's about certainty, actually, and it's about how you plan ahead. So investors in UK renewable energy supply chains continue to stress the important certainty of future offshore floating and wind platforms. Given this, why does the government continue to have this short-term approach to floating offshore wind procurement, with auction rounds only clearing a fraction of the eligible projects in allocation rounds?
So I hear what you say. Firstly, on the FLOMAS procedure, I understand the disappointment, and officials within the department are engaging, I know right now, with ports who were not successful through the FLOMAS project to work through how we can, as a government, as a country, support them moving forward to take advantage of the huge increase in floating offshore wind manufacturing that will happen over the next few years. In terms of auction rounds and budgets for floating, obviously the Secretary of State has the opportunity through the auction round process to revise upwards the budget for any of the pots of money that are available for certain technologies, and when it comes to having to take the decision, the Secretary of State will take a view as to whether or not that is required to float. We do hear the concerns from the industry, though.
So we saw that with one round where no one secured any CFDs, the next one we didn't, where we wanted to. But can the government?
Yes, I think that demonstrates when the government does listen, learns, and takes action by increasing the strike price by 72%.
We recognise the process, but in terms of security, certainty, and the ambition that the government has to deliver offshore wind, will the government release a CFD auction plan with draft budgets and technology targets for a few years in advance, rather than this annual kind of process?
I think the current intention is to stick to the annual process, but absolutely hear the need for certainty as much as possible.
Thanks.
Vicky Ford.
I'm going to talk about critical minerals, and before I start, Minister, some of us went to go and see a company called Geothermal Engineering in Cornwall, okay, who've discovered the highest concentration of lithium brine in the world, with some of the lowest cross-contamination with magnesium. And thinking about it, I am utterly surprised that that place is absolutely swarming with help from Whitehall, thinking about how do we get this through planning approvals quickly, get it going, etc. And things are changing very rapidly. Last week, the Defence Secretary said we're on war footing. The Prime Minister has recently spoken about China being the greatest state-breast threat to our economic security. So even what we saw last month, the world has changed since.
Yeah.
So as just my comment to you, where we do find critical minerals in this country, I think we need to be massively faster about getting that into our defence and security now. So I'm going to leave that with you. We've heard criticism that the critical mineral strategy is vague. I've got in front of myself the Task and Finish Group report, which is, lovely, but it's written by industry. You don't get to recommendation to page 88, and the recommendations are pretty woolly. They're sweet, but key recommendation that the prioritising the mitigation of geopolitical risks with key producer countries should be central.
Absolutely right.
Okay? Give me one country where you've changed our foreign policy strategy in the past 12 months because of critical minerals.
Well, obviously...
One example.
Obviously, the foreign policy is determined by the SCDO, and as a former Foreign Office Minister, I know you will appreciate that. And this is held, the critical minerals brief is held across 3 different departments, lead department being Department for Business and Trade. I have engaged having just adopted this into my portfolio, I have engaged already with the government of Bolivia and have had discussions with international counterparts, including the United States and Canada, as to how we build up our capacity in what traditionally was called the West, to counter the increasingly unstable geopolitical world in which we are operating.
With respect, having been a senior minister in that department 18 months ago, if the weight that we were putting on critical minerals is still the same as it was 18 months ago, it ain't good enough for a war footing.
So
given the recommendations that have come out since from this task finish.
Yeah, no, 100%. And Ms. Ford, I completely agree with you.
Changed.
Yeah, it has changed. And one prime example I can give to that is the fact that the critical minerals lead minister, Nusgani, has taken with her from DBT the portfolio into the Foreign Office. So now there is a minister focused on this in the Foreign Office, and there is a genuine change of atmosphere and indeed intent around what we are doing in this field. It will include working very strongly with allies, because we do not have the for example, the processing capability here in the United Kingdom, but supporting those countries that do have them and trying to edge out China's influence in this field, I think, is really critically important.
This task and finish report that came out last December, could we ask you to write to us with a list of what the government has done to implement the recommendations?
Absolutely.
Okay, so we can absolutely see this.
Yep.
Okay, and given what the Prime Minister has said about the threats from China, is it right that the UK is still significantly relying on China for so many critical minerals, and how are we mitigating that risk?
It is obviously a concern. And through the actions recommended in the report, through the actions already being taken by the Department for Business and Trade, and through the mitigations that we are discussing between ourselves and our partners and allies in the United States and Canada and in Europe, we are going to be taking significant action, including working with those countries that have the processing capabilities to ensure that we are less reliant moving forward on China. But this is not an overnight fix, as you are fully aware, Mrs. Ford. So it will take some time to feed through, but we are fully aware of this. Ben, I don't know if you want to say any more in detail about that. Sorry.
Just that we are continuing to absolutely look at bilateral agreements with lots of countries on exactly this. So we've already got bilateral partnership agreements with, to give a few examples, South Africa, Canada, Kazakhstan, Australia, Zambia, and more on the way. So this is something that is an ongoing effort.
And given what the Foreign Affairs Committee said about needing to have a more specific strategy, can you now map, different countries by priority, how you're increasing your priority of the relationship with those different countries, but on each mineral?
We could maybe write on the detail of different countries, but yes, we're sort of working through where there are supplies and where there are critical supplies of each mineral, and that's part of the process of signing those bilateral agreements.
Minister, you mentioned Bolivia. I don't know how strong the environmental mining processes are in a country like Bolivia. But in that sort of conversation you've had, what weight do you put on environmental, social values, safety standards in the manufacturing process?
I mean, huge. And I think that's where British companies and companies from Europe and North America and Australia can add significant value, because the health and safety, the certainty of investment, and indeed the history of success in operating mines across the world lends itself to doing business in these countries in a far better way than they are being offered by, for example, a company from the People's Republic of China.
How do you know that, quote, British company isn't just registered in the UK but actually not producing any benefits, jobs, etc. in the UK?
Obviously, all of these factors are taken into consideration when we engage with the country.
And how, I spoke at the beginning about trying to ensure domestic alternatives. Are you, given what the Defence Secretary said just last week, about security, shoring up our security, how are you going to react to what he has said and shore up our security of crucial minerals?
No, we're very much aware of the situation in which we find ourselves in the world right now. Very excited by the discovery in Cornwall. DBT are the lead department. They are engaging extensively with that particular development. And of course, when it comes to energy supply, it is very crucially important.
If Derek went down there next month, he would hear them saying, funnily enough, a man from the department or woman from the department's been down, they're going to help us to process this more quickly, get through some of those bureaucratic barriers they were talking about. That conversation is going to be happening, is that right?
And I can't speak for another department, but I very much hope that they are listening and that they will be all acting.
Ministers work across departments.
Yes, indeed.
This is the point. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I could ask for that meeting.
Just to put your mind at ease, we do work cross department, and as such, myself and the relative ministers from DBT and the SCDO had a trilateral on this just 2 weeks ago.
In that example, we heard all sorts of bureaucratic barriers, important ones, environmental permits, etc., etc.
Yeah.
So I'm going to leave it with you that how do you speed it up?
Well, a review of planning and consenting is essential if we're going to deliver only even half of the projects that we're seeking to deliver across the country. To give an example, not related to critical minerals, but related to environmental consenting, in my mind, it's absolutely absurd that Sizewell C, for example, have had to complete 40,000 pages of environmental consenting paperwork in order to get even the first spade in the ground. That has to change. We have to overcome and reduce the bureaucratic, the barriers and the red tape to deliver some of these projects.
And in the interest of moving things along, Lloyd Russell-Moore.
Sorry.
That's quite all right.
You mentioned there about processing capabilities, and one of the things that we saw in Cornwall when it was explained to us is that the value is, of course, in the more that you process the lithium, and while some projects is just to extract and then send off for processing, the value is then not really retained in Cornwall or in Britain. And so we need to develop, clearly, mineral processing activities here where the value is added. But I mean, Lord Watson was clear in the House of Lords the other day that the UK is probably unique in many countries that we don't really have an industrial strategy that is aligned with a development of our needs around new technologies and green energy. So, why does the government not have an industrial strategy that is led on this?
Well, as I said, we take the situation regarding critical minerals, the geopolitical situation we find ourselves very seriously. We're working with partner countries across the world to help develop the processing capability within those countries that already have an established capability that we can work with and trust.
All those other countries that you've mentioned have some form of industrial strategy, a strategy which is how we're going to extract, how we're going to develop and build up our industries, this is how we're going to do it, and this is how all the industries can align. We have not. We have chosen to take a different path from almost every other country. Why do we think that path of not having a strategy, not telling people or businesses...
We do have a critical mineral strategy, but I hear you saying industrial strategy.
You have a critical mineral strategy of how you're going to secure mineral extraction and secure minerals, but do you have the strategy of how we're going to process those minerals? Do we have a strategy of how we're going to build up capacity to use those minerals? That's the issue, because that's where the value is.
As a government, we see the value in supporting those countries with already established processing capabilities to ensure that security of supply from trusted partners while supporting those who are at source delivering those minerals to those processing capabilities. That's where we see the value added for the UK.
So the government doesn't see a value added in building up processing capabilities
we see the UK expertise in mining and delivery at source being where we can add value to the global supply chain.
Okay. The DBT supply chain strategy is focused on trade and supply chain resilience. But does DESNES have any plans to produce a domestic supply chain strategy specific to the energy sector?
We don't have a particular plan to announce to produce a supply chain strategy. What we are doing is working with industry in each of the key sectors where we feel we have domestic advantage to understand the supply chain constraints, to understand where there are opportunities to invest, and to target investments such as we've got through the 1.1 billion we put into the Giga Fund.
I mean, I don't understand, maybe this is a point, not a question now, I don't understand why we are kind of rejecting the idea of a strategy or the idea that you actually produce a set of aims that you're trying to reach. Instead, you're taking a very ad hoc approach of saying, well, we'll discuss with this industry, we'll discuss with that company, but you aren't marshalling any of the activities together. Is that a conscious decision that you think you will get more by doing it in an ad hoc approach, or is it just that there's a lack of capability to produce something that every other country has produced?
I wouldn't describe it as an ad hoc approach, the approach that we're taking. We are absolutely focused on what we need to do when it comes to securing critical minerals and ensuring that we do not become heavily reliant or any more reliant on one country or one supplier than another. Yes. And of course, our duty to support those countries that are delivering the key critical minerals, the minerals that are key to delivering our net zero, more energy secure future. However, we see where the UK's value added is in that. It is supporting at the source with the mining capabilities and tradition of excellence in that field where we can add value, whilst also supporting those countries with established processing capabilities to ramp those up that we can take advantage of in our trusted allies across the world.
Thank you. Can I turn to the Giga Fund? Obviously, there's the autumn statement, 4.5 billion announced, of which I think originally 960 was going to Giga Fund. That's been increased now by, it says now 1.1 billion, which is quite welcome. What do you think the tangible outcomes in terms of jobs and factories is going to be, specifically from the Giga Fund?
Well, if we look specifically, we've already seen £300 million of the Giga Fund be directed towards the development of new nuclear fuel capability in the UK, which will see jobs being created.
Is that fusion or
it's for advanced nuclear. It's not fusion. It's for traditional but advanced nuclear fuels. If you understand what I'm trying to say, and that will see that money being directed towards, along with private capital, the increasing of a capacity at a UK manufacturing base already established and the creation of jobs in that field. So that is one example where already Giga is delivering tangible benefit to the UK manufacturing base and indeed the onshoring of some of the expertise and capabilities that we need to see here in the UK.
It's always great to get more jobs, and we all love the opportunities it presents, but we have an underemployment problem in this country. Where do we think we're going to find the skills from? And the people to actually do the job.
So skills is the biggest challenge facing us, but not just facing us, facing just about every country in the world that's engaging on a process similar to ours right now. The Green Jobs Task Force will be delivering their report imminently, I am told, and that will be setting out how we can take advantage of the huge opportunities in terms of reskilling, upskilling, getting people interested in STEM subjects from a very young age. In the nuclear field, I launched with MINDP. In fact, we're launching officially today, although I'm unable to actually make the official launch, our nuclear skills task force. It is working cross-sector, private and public, working with higher education institutions to make much easier to access and make much more viable for those organisations taking part to deliver the opportunities for the young people of today, but not just young people, people who are in established energy industries. For example, there are thousands upon thousands of energy workers in the North Sea who are seeing the opportunities in oil and gas to decrease year on year. Transitioning those workers, retraining them into the new energy of the future, taking the skills that they already have, will be vitally important to this effort. But we're open-eyed, clear-headed about this. It's a huge challenge, and it is, I think, notwithstanding all the other challenges that we've just spoken about today, the one thing which will prevent us actually delivering these projects will be the lack of skilled labour to actually build and operate, and that's why we're taking action through the Green Jobs Task Force and indeed the Nuclear Skills Task Force as well.
There's been some criticism on the delay in the announcement of how Giga funding will be awarded to industry, and in fact some criticism that it's not actually enough, 1.1 billion, given the challenge ahead. How would you respond to that?
I would say there's always an opportunity to increase budgets, and these discussions take place with Treasury on a regular basis as to whether or not there is enough money in the pot. We think that what we have got through Giga. How much did we ask for?
You got 1.1. How much did you ask for?
We're very There's this the Giga Fund as it is right now. We are very pleased with where we have got to with Giga. We think it's going to be transformative.
No, seriously, Minister, it's a really important point.
It's a very important point, Chairman. But you would be,
and I am going to press you on this because we need to know how far we're falling behind. So you and your department plan, and you talked about how much you plan and all the rest of it. You must have a very good idea. This is a really, really important area. If the Treasury is underperforming, I want to know how much is underperforming.
Treasury are absolutely not. underperforming.
You're brilliantly on message.
The Giga, I think, will be transformative when it comes to building up the supply chains and the manufacturing base and attracting the investment. And in fact, when I engage with investors, they are very pleased with what Giga is going to be able to do in a very focused, determined way. Absolutely, to bring in match funding from private investors into the United Kingdom to build up exactly what we've been speaking about right here. And you wouldn't expect me to get into private discussions between Secretaries of State, Treasury, and elsewhere.
Yeah, we would. But actually, it's a very, very important point. But on this match funding point, actually, it's Lloyd Russell-Moore did raise a very important point about foreign investors coming into the UK. Having been the Minister for Investment, my job back when I was in DIT was to encourage exactly that. So with this Giga Fund, what you're suggesting is that you put a little bit in, and then you get other money coming in. And if it's coming in from overseas, then that benefits our balance and payments. It benefits our current, reduces our current account deficit, and therefore leaves the government. So it's only 1.1 billion, but if it was 2.1 billion, that's 1 billion less that can go into schools or police or the NHS.
Exactly. The government has to take a balanced approach to all of this. There are huge pressures, as we know, on the public finances, and it's absolutely about the Giga is about giving the certainty to private investors to come to the United Kingdom, knowing that foundation will be laid and that they can invest on top of that. And indeed, when I talk to investors, not just in the City of London, but from around the world, they think Giga is a great model, building on top of our established CFD processes and everything else we have going for us too.
There's been, again, some criticism that it's sort of slightly strangely targeted. And in particular, I think we miss out on solar and tidal on this. I asked you about nuclear fusion, and there are one or two, and as you're aware, I have a declarable interest or non-financial declarable interest in the space energy industry. Is there any available for things like fusion and the next generation of green energy production?
Well, I can't get drawn into what may or may not be decided in terms of further iterations of Giga moving forward. We're very pleased with where it is right now. In terms of fusion, we were able to announce a £600 million investment in fusion alone just last year, made available by the decision not to reassociate with Euratom. So there are other ways of funding. Giga isn't the only thing in town. The Fusion Futures Fund, for example, is one example of that.
Yeah. Just one final question before we come on to Derek Thomas. There's a sort of an accusation. There's a relatively modest amount of funding for CCUS and the hydrogen sectors. That's 390 million. Are you convinced the Giga Fund will have a tangible impact on industry within these particular large infrastructure?
I'm absolutely convinced of that, and also very buoyed by the interest in both of those sectors by private finance who are looking to invest here in the UK.
You're happy?
Yeah.
Eric.
Thank you. Who in government, Minister, is responsible for port infrastructure?
Port infrastructure, that would be Department for Transport, Minister, and I believe it is Lord Byron Davis.
So it's a bit unfair question, except we've already talked about the problem of across Whitehall delivering or making sure you have the tools and the environment to deliver what you need to deliver by the right deadlines. We've been told that investment in ports is an important bottleneck in development of net zero supply chains. What is the government's plan for port infrastructure, getting it in the right place?
What we're seeing across the UK is huge investment in port infrastructure. I was at the opening, for example, of Aberdeen South Harbour late last year with the Royal Highness Princess Royal. That's a private initiative and is, I think, up to that point, one of the biggest expansions of any port infrastructure in the United Kingdom for about half a century. We've seen through Flomis, the successful ports at Port Talbot and Cromarty get significant sums of government money to increase their capabilities to deliver the floating offshore wind build that we're expecting over the next few years. And the Department for Transport is engaging with ports up and down the country in terms of what else we can do to support them to deliver the fixed and floating opportunities that are out there.
Yeah. So I'm glad you mentioned Flomis and also offshore wind. So the one-off schemes such as those that you've mentioned cannot have a significant impact on port development. How do you plan to make sure, I mean, you touched on it already, but how do you plan to make sure that the ports really are ready in time and not just kind of the tail end of the process of delivering energy net zero?
Don't get me wrong, I think that the opportunities for British ports to take advantage of the incredible build that we're expecting to see in both fixed and floating are transformative, and will be for those ports that are engaging right now with government and indeed with industry. FLOMUS is not the end of the story. FLOMUS, of course, is significantly important, and Port Talbot and Cromarty will be taking full advantage of the money that's been made available to them. However, officials from the department are engaging with other ports up and down the country. I know the DFT ministers are as well, to see how other forms of support can be generated, including attracting private and inward investment to port infrastructure around the UK to ensure that they are in a place to deliver. And on FLOMUS, or floating specifically, I think that the opportunities are not just for the build domestically here, but the export opportunity of having first mover advantage in developing floating offshore wind, I think will bring huge benefit to the UK economically overall, and indeed to the ports that are getting in there right now.
I hear that, Minister, and it's just that I wonder if the experience on the ground is the same. So by the time the CFDs are allocated and developers are ready to deploy, it's too late then to start the work to construct reporting structure. You talked about Hinkley Point C and how much work had to be done before anything hit the ground. That's exactly the same. Potentially even more so when you start disturbing the seabed near to ports. So how confident can you be, and how do you plan on bridging this gap between time and financing, and making sure that actually the ports aren't almost the afterthought that is struggling to keep up with the need to get to net zero?
I mean, I've spoken about FLOMUS, but also we can't forget OMUS, which was the precursor to FLOMUS, and we're expecting quite a bit of the infrastructure that was supported through that scheme to actually be delivered by the end of 2024, or at least be beginning to be delivered by 2024, by the end of 2024 this year. So this work is ongoing already, Mr. Thomas. We are absolutely committed to supporting ports get ahead of the curve so they can take advantage of the investment. And you're right, there's a lot of work goes on before, I suppose you don't put a spade in the ground at sea, before you drop down to the ocean bed. So, and we need to ensure that our port infrastructure is ready to take advantage of that. I don't know, Ben, if you want to.
Well, just to add a little, I mean, it's absolutely right that there is a much wider context here than the CFD. So to take two other examples, there is the Flexible Investment Opportunity Fund, which is there for free ports in particular. That's £150 million to let them capitalised investment opportunities. But I'd also add things like, we mentioned earlier the importance of the grid and accelerating connections there, and actually that transmission infrastructure is part of what allows ports to expand. So bringing that forward will help as well.
I think there's definitely room to communicate some of that, because I certainly know from Cornwall and all the work we did around flow was the need to get ports in a position, and just the really difficult task of trying to find any cash whatsoever. I've attended an infrastructure commission meeting this morning. They said that they have no responsibility for ports other than a vague connection to energy delivery, for example. So there seems to be a better communication, or maybe even better forward thinking about the role that ports play, and the potential for them to be a drag on delivering the key issues that you're so ambitious about today.
No, absolutely. I'm determined to ensure that they are not. I engage with ports very regularly, both in a constituency and in a ministerial capability, so I understand very much the challenges that they face, and that they can be the key driver towards success in this field. Mr. Thomas, I completely agree.
Thanks. Forward.
Back to critical minerals. Why has the government abandoned the National Materials Data Hub?
I don't know, but I will find out and I'll get an answer to you.
So I thought that there was a requirement across each government department to help to deliver net zero.
Yes, there are.
Is there now a requirement across each government department to help to deliver energy security and net zero?
Not as yet. We are the lead department for this, but it's a very good suggestion, Mrs. Ford. I'll take back.
We will make that suggestion.
Yeah, please do.
Because we've spoken a lot about the difficulties.
Absolutely.
So this National Materials Data Hub was supposed to be helping you to tackle availability of critical raw materials. We understand that it's been dropped, or was dropped back a few years ago. We've been told that would be really helpful. We've also been told that setting recycling targets for critical raw materials would be really helpful. That there are very, very low recycling targets. I mean, think about, even in your brief, by 2050, over 5,000 wind turbines will have reached the end of their lives. Okay, massively critical materials, but actually some of the earlier wind turbines already have. So how are you recycling materials, not using virgin materials. Are you planning on setting national targets for recycling of critical materials?
That is a consideration, yes. And on your first point about the database, I will engage with my DBT counterpart. Yes, we are. Okay. And I will engage with my DBT counterpart and get back to you with a fuller answer on what exactly is going on.
Do you think that those targets should be looking at more specific materials where there are shorter supply, prioritising which raw materials so that recyclers have got a view which to prioritise?
Yes, but we have not. We are not at that point of developing a policy on this.
Can you roll out those recycling targets?
I'm unable to give you an answer to that question right now.
Will they be binding on local authorities?
Again, we're not quite at that stage.
We know local authorities only treated recycling seriously when they got penalties under the WEEE directive.
Yeah. All of these are considerations as we move forward.
So would you agree that we should learn from what's worked in the past to encourage local authorities to improve recycling?
Yes, I would absolutely agree
in
with that.
terms of both carrots and sticks?
Yep, 100%.
Thank you. Product standards.
Mm-hmm.
Now, clearly we want to try and make sure the products that we buy aren't wasteful in terms of the materials that are used. We've been told that voluntary product standards won't necessarily shift the market. Are you looking at mandatory product standards? We've been told the government has ruled that out.
I don't think we are, Ben.
I don't think we are. I mean, obviously there are a range of product standards which are mandatory already in the market through, for instance, eco-design, but I don't think we are on that. We might have to come to right on that point.
We've been told a summary report was based on the government's consultation last December, and it concluded that it will explore whether there's a role for MPSs from the late 20s or early 30s, but not any earlier. We've been told that in certain products, mandatory product standards could really help reduce overuse of critical products.
Okay.
Suggest you look at that again.
No, I absolutely commit to doing that.
And that's a large majority of the respondents said, please bring in mandatory.
Well, I commit to looking at that. Also commit to looking at the report that you end up compiling from the end of this and taking away any of the recommendations.
Yeah, a large number of people suggested this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well done. Minister and Mr. Golding, thank you very much indeed for coming for us. This is quite a quick session. Thank you very much for your candour. The meeting's over. Order.
Thank you very much, Chair.
The proceeding has ended.